all the meeting notes. So, thank you all so much for joining this update meeting. I know I got some out of office notifications and or some people saying they were going to be on vacation during this meeting. So I know that some of you here will pass along information and or these notes that I share out with you guys can get widely shared to those of your colleagues who could not be here with us today. We only have two main objectives for today's meeting. I'm going to give you guys an overview of kind of why we're having this update meeting, the listening sessions, if you weren't involved in those or couldn't attend one of those, how they went and what feedback we received from them, and then hand it over to Naima to explain how this all fits into a larger picture here at the Department of Health and outside of the Department of Health. So first, if you weren't involved in them, back at the very end of February, in the very beginning of March, we had 3 listening sessions. I believe it was like Monday, Tuesday, Friday, or something along those lines, where we laid out our plan and our vision for ININ moving forward at the Department of Health. And so I'm going to recap that vision real quick for anyone who wasn't there. Our plan as we presented it in those meetings was that the Indiana Nutrition Incentive Network, or ININ as I call it, would continue to sit here at the Department of Health within the Division of Nutrition and Physical Activity under myself and Naima, and that we would support this initiative with some SNAP Ed dollars and with potentially some SPAN dollars, or State Physical Activity and Nutrition Grant dollars. SPAN had come out from the last time we had an IN meeting to those listening sessions and really indicated those are pretty structured grants for anyone who hasn't seen them. Those in REACH had pretty much the same deliverables, and nutrition incentives were one of them. So to respond to that initiative that we had to fulfill within SPAN, we explained our vision for ININ, which included funding a nutrition incentive coordinator position here at the State Department of Health that would sit on our team and help to run ININ, because there's limited capacity between myself and Naima and the rest of our team to lead this whole organization in a way that it should be led, and therefore we believe that we needed a whole person. Our proposal for SPAN was that person would be half funded by the SPAN grant, which is a 5-year funding source, and half funded by SNAP Ed, which is an annual in perpetuity funding source at this point, that our division receives as the oversight agency. Should we not be awarded SPAN for any reason, that position would become fully SNAP Ed funded. So we do imagine that position will be coming to our team before the end of 2023, ideally starting on October 1st of this coming year, and will be a permanent fixture as part of not only our team's response to these national strategies, but also our SNAP Ed work at large. So also within SPAN, we laid out kind of our quasi vision for 5 years. We really had to be specific for the first year, which was to build capacity of this organization through the hiring of that person, and then to evaluate the 2 projects that are ongoing right now. So for those who aren't aware, the Division of Nutrition and Physical Activity lead a statewide Produce RX pilot, as well as through Mary Tyndall, who's here on this call right now, the SNAP Matching at Farmers Market pilot. Those are CDC funds that came down to departments of health all over the country, and Mary is heading up that SNAP matching one across the state. And so we wanted to spend that first year really evaluating them, learning what's working, what's not working, what are some barriers to access for markets all over the state of different sizes, or maybe in different areas, whether suburban, rural, urban, and how this group might be able to organize to address some of those barriers and to keep the momentum going in the areas where this is really successful and this funding has been really helpful. How can we keep supporting that? Ultimately, we would like to see the state apply for a GUSNIP grant, a large-scale Gus Schumacher Nutrition Incentive Program grant, to really continue to support funding SNAP matching, both in farmers markets and in retail across the state moving forward. So that's our longer term vision. If you were in those listening sessions, you also know that we imagine that ININ would have more than just this one pillar that I know this group has largely focused on for the last few years, but would also add a Produce RX pillar and a food justice, food access pillar. So for that Produce RX pillar, we would build on that evaluation of the statewide Produce RX pilot, as well as the information we know from partners around the state who aren't part of that pilot but do run Produce RX programs about similar things. What are barriers? What are successes? What is working well and what is not, as well as convening, as we wrote into SPAN, a community of practice. This will likely happen with or without SPAN dollars, but this community of practice peer learning group will be led by Indiana University and some of their evaluators that have been evaluating Produce RX programs in the Uplands region for a couple years now, and have a large component of advocacy. We're really hoping to see Indiana Medicaid adopt some of these waivers that are available to further expand access to Produce RX across the state for our Medicaid eligible populations, or I guess our Medicaid enrolled populations. A lot of our funded entities through this pilot are FQHCs or lookalikes that do serve high Medicaid eligible or Medicaid enrolled populations. And so we believe it's a great start. It's the area that has a lot of momentum nationally. There's a lot of states applying for demonstration projects and for waivers through Medicaid. And so that will be a large component of that pillar to start. If you don't know, the state, as state employees, we can't engage in advocacy work in a lot of extents. So sitting it outside of our agency allows for the group to do a lot more robust advocacy for that initiative. They have a lot more access to activities that we wouldn't be able to lead as state agency employees. And then that last pillar is the food access and food justice one. And that really came out of the understanding that a lot of us had in some of these calls previously was that the double up national brand or like model doesn't work for everyone. It's not the model that works in some communities, is currently being employed in some communities, nor is it the model that some communities want. They want something that's a lot more flexible, that's not just snap to fruit and vegetable or the other way around, or fruit and veg to fruit and veg, but really want a SNAP matching program that's really rooted in food justice and in equity and is focused on increasing the purchasing power of SNAP clients, both in retail and at farm stands, markets, CSAs, all sorts of things. That is a largely unexplored area nationally as far as like funding sources and things like that. So we're really excited to understand that pillar and what people envision and want out of that pillar and how as an organization, we can continue to move that work forward in the communities that prefer that model. Through our listening sessions, we largely gained a lot of really great feedback on this model, positive feedback, I should say. All of it was great feedback, positive feedback on this model. There were some questions raised about this organization sitting at the Department of Health versus at an outside organization. Currently, we believe that this is our, as we just learned the phrase, minimal viable product. This is a great place to start. This is a place that we currently have capacity and funding to start. And should this need to move outside of the agency at some point, or should the structure need to change down the road, we're open and happy to have those conversations. But we also want to get started. We know that this infrastructure has been slowly being built for many years and believe that we just need to start moving in the forward direction and then adjust as needed. What is perfect? A perfect model today will not be a perfect model in 18 months. And so we're really just hoping that alongside all of you, we can all be nimble and flexible and responsive to the opportunities that exist out there funding wise and structure wise, and to our communities and what they express that they need or want out of an organization such as this. So that was one big piece of feedback, which we don't necessarily disagree with. We understand the cons of state bureaucratic government. Our contract process was mentioned many times. We understand that it's not the best. Our vision, though, is that this programmatic work would not happen at the Department of Health, but would happen kind of like a hub and spoke model. We would get funds, for example, and then distribute those funds similarly to how we do with Mary right now to some community-based organization that can serve a regional area who would then help to distribute the funds into smaller entities and into community. Those organizations tend to be much more nimble and flexible and able to get money out the door in a way that we cannot get money out the door here at the Department of Health, and we recognize that. But these organizations have huge assets, which is their nimbleness. And so capitalizing on their nimbleness while also capitalizing on the ability of a state agency to handle and bring in large amounts of money and then redistribute across the state as necessary. Another great piece of feedback we got was about senior farmers market nutrition programs and WIC at farmers markets as matching programs, as incentive programs that do exist in some communities. Some communities match all forms of programs at their farmers market, not just SNAP. This is a pillar that is largely unexplored to us because both of those programs are controlled by the WIC division here at the Department of Health. And so we're really interested in this being a fourth pillar and understanding how ININ could support some of the barriers that are facing communities with these programs, but largely don't know what that looks like at the moment and would really rely on all of you guys who have on the ground experience to help inform us about like what we might be the most useful in or what an organized movement might be the most useful for. So that was a really exciting piece of feedback. I think that's a very long 10-minute version of our overview of our listening sessions, but because of our listening sessions, we did decide to continue moving forward with this plan. We will keep everyone apprised on how SPAN turns out, if it gets funded or not, but we really just want to emphasize today that based on the listening session feedback and the available capacity and funding sources that we have here in the Department of Health at the current time, we will keep moving forward even if we are not funded with SPAN. The Indiana Nutrition Incentive Coordinator will still be a funded position within our team, just fully through SNAP Ed funds. And we will continue to support IU in convening that community of practice for Produce RX. And we will continue to eye a larger GusNIP kind of program for the state, if that makes sense, in 2024 and moving forward. So before I turn it, Naima, do you want me to open the floor to questions now, or do you want to explain the larger picture first?
Yeah, why don't I just provide a little context first, and then we can open it up for some conversation. I think what I was hoping to, well, hello, everybody. It's wonderful to be with you today. Don't want to be all business too soon. I think what I was really hoping to underscore for you all today is that our overarching goal with nutrition incentives work at the Department of Health is to really create capacity to support long-term infrastructure for all of these different programming mechanisms, for Double Up, for Produce RX, for any sort of more unrestricted funding models to support more holistic community projects. And it's this very important and unique moment in time where a lot of different funding sources seem to be converging around nutrition incentive work, which is phenomenal. When we were at the ASNA conference, which is the professional organization for SNAP Ed agencies, there was a presentation from FNS where they were talking about the White House strategy and sort of speaking to this concern that a lot of people, that I've heard from a lot of people about some of the things laid out in the national strategy, is that a lot of them seem like kind of unfunded mandates, right? Like, this is what all of you need to do to end hunger and improve nutrition, but there's not a lot of policy work yet at the federal level to support those things within states. And what they said is that, you know, we are working together, we meaning federal funders. So we had represented there people from USDA, people from GusNIP, people from CDC, and they said it's not an accident, right, that versions of this are appearing in RFAs in different funding sources that haven't traditionally really worked together in that way. So what we're attempting to do here is to really braid together these different funding sources to create an infrastructure that is systematic, right? And that lasts longer than any one person in my position or Megan's position or anybody's position. That's really baked in to our approach to community nutrition, at least within our division. So that being said, I think that it's important to note that specific to SPAN, what we hope to work on in the first year is, number one, once we hired a nutrition incentives coordinator, sort of the formal build out of these 3 or maybe 4 pillars. and the creation of work streams and the articulation of a mission and vision for the network. But number two, to really focus on double up and work on building out a statewide infrastructure that would support an application for a large-scale GusNIP project. And the reason that GusNIP comes into play here, and this was very explicitly mentioned at that convening that I just mentioned, in SPAN, nutrition incentives and produce prescription is listed as a required strategy, but of course, none of that CDC funding can actually be used to support the incentive piece. So they very explicitly include within the RFA to SPAN that you will have to utilize GusNIP, right? It was intended as kind of a companion piece of funding. So that being said, we imagine even down the road as part of the 5-year SPAN grant that in 2024, hopefully we'll be in a place where we can apply for funding for a statewide double up program. To Megan's point, we hope to identify regional partnership, regional implementation partners across the state so that we are not doing local programming. That's not our role as a state agency. So the first year of SPAN will really be focused on building out that statewide infrastructure to support double up. And then as the project goes on, I'm being very optimistic about our chances for receiving SPAN funding. As the 5-year project goes on, then we'll kind of figure out what that looks like in the food as medicine and produce RX space. So there's a lot to do, of course, but we really feel that this is the moment in time to try to be as intentional and efficient as possible with the funding that's currently available. Because who knows when this will happen again, when all of these different funding streams are converging to support infrastructure. In the past, GusNIP was really the only game in town when it comes to funding infrastructure, and it's been so uncertain whether or not programs are able to secure funding to make their programs sustainable. So I just wanted to highlight that it's part of our sort of overall approach to our work within, and it's very, I think, fundamental to the role of SNAP Ed as well. I think we're really lucky to have the community wellness coordinators in Indiana. We kind of have built-in technical assistance support really throughout the state, but the nature of their positions there to support community nutrition initiatives. So I think it's a really exciting moment. And I don't think that I have too much else to say. Megan, is there anything else that I need to mention in terms of structural things? I think the sooner we can get our new person on board, the better. I don't want to make this announcement for you, Megan, but I'm going to. Megan's going to be leaving us at some time in the next few months. She's going to be moving to Cleveland, where her husband is starting a residency program with the Cleveland Clinic. So we're very sad to see Megan go. So we'll be rehiring for her position and hiring a nutrition incentives coordinator within the next, 6 months or so here internally. And I think that's about all I have. Oh, the one other thing that I wanted to mention about the third pillar, the kind of food justice and local food access pillar, I'm really thinking about that as our opportunity to really investigate building some funding mechanisms that are more centered around private sector investors. I've had conversations with many people on this call about the need for unrestricted funding sources for all types of food projects around the state, not just nutrition incentive work, but there's really a need to be able to secure funding to meet communities where they are in terms of not just snap to snap matching potentially at farmers markets, but also thinking about farmers themselves and what kind of support they need to really produce enough food to contribute to the community nutrition landscape in their communities. So I think that there's some exciting possibilities to explore there in that third pillar in terms of potentially building out some kind of food fund that is a little bit more versatile and can be a little bit more responsive to local communities.
Okay, thank you, Naima. So we would love to open up the floor to any questions or comments and pose one question of our own that we do not have to start with. You guys can, thank you, Elise. I was going to mention that, that we can talk about at any point, but just trying to understand how people feel about needing or wanting a reoccurring space to convene this group. And if so, like, how we were previously once a month, in the interim of hiring this new nutrition incentive coordinator. And if that is a desired thing for anyone, what kind of topic would they want to see? Would we want to rotate through the pillars every month and you show up, in the month that makes sense to you? How you would maybe want to see that structured from your point of view. There are literally no right answers here. We're just really trying to understand if a space is wanted and needed, and if so, we're happy to provide that. But beyond that question, we'll leave the rest of the questions for you guys to ask us.
This is could kind of answer that a little bit. I was curious with like the Double Up grant this summer, if there would be any Double Up specific meetings that would be happening. I could just see, like as we're getting ready for some of our markets, especially those where like the market manager themselves is running the grant. Like I could see where there could be some benefit of, maybe in June or July where they can kind of come together to talk about what's going well, if there's any questions that have come up, of kind of creating a little cohort or, even seasonal community of practice where there's space for folks, especially who are new, can kind of have that camaraderie around the similar program.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, we can work with Mary and figure out what that would look like for people, and how to support that. I think that's a great idea, Elise. And I know I've gotten a similar request at times from our statewide producer X green teas as well.
Okay, I have I feel stupid, but Teams, somehow I got it where I can only see the chat and I've lost, like I only have a small box of the meeting. I am not used to Teams. Does anyone know how I can make the meeting my full screen again?
You should be able, the box that's just a tiny box, you should just be able to click on it and it will expand.
Oh,
is that
yes,
not working?
I double click. Okay,
There
thank you.
You're welcome.
Oh man.
Go ahead, Angela.
Hi. Thanks for sharing all the info. I could use a visual to fully understand everything that you just shared, but I'm wondering if you said what the timeline was for knowing when the SPAN grant is a sure thing or not.
Yeah, so we will find out about SPAN in August, I think. I don't think we find out until August, unfortunately. But because we are going to be essentially, there's not a lot about our approach that will change, I don't think, based on SPAN. We are still shooting, I'm shooting to maybe post this nutrition incentive coordinator position by the end of July so that that person can have a 10/1 start date, and get started with sort of the development of some of these deliverables. And I think it's a great idea to work on a visual, and we will do that, Angela.
Thank you.
One thing related to SPAN that I don't think we mentioned, because of the transition, because of some of the great conversations we had about WIC and Senior Farmers Market Nutrition Program during our listening sessions, we actually did write that into our SPAN grant to make some funding available for vendors, because of the transition to this new e-WIC system. And I know that they're making some funding available in the first couple of years of the transition, but we would be making funding available all through the 5 years of span to cover those technology fees for vendors. So hopefully that is one thing that we wouldn't be able to provide with other funding sources. So that's one extra reason to root for us for SPAN.
I have a few questions and I can ask them all at once or sprinkle them in. One, because I don't want to hog the questions. One question was about for this summer's, the Double Up grant. Will there be shared evaluation measures that would be helpful for us to include? We do routinely have a summer survey, and so can absolutely add and just make sure that we're covering the questions as needed. And so wasn't sure if that was in the works, but would really advocate for one if there's not one.
Like with the market managers? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, or just even, we do one with our market managers and with participants of if they would like, I mean, similar to the GusNIP one, we modify it and have some of our own ones, but could share as many of the questions that overlapped. More so of like, if we could get data, even if it's only a few surveys here and there, just to support the impact at the customer level. And then we do the vendor one as well. I could just, the more data we could get to support the economic impact, just the customer, we know that will be beneficial. So if we're happy to share what we have, but if there could be just aggregate data from different parts of the state, just how beneficial that could be.
Yeah, that does make a lot of sense. It's not currently planned to do any of that. It's just the data from the sales and the redemptions, and then a final report that the market managers will fill out. But that's all we have right now built into it. But I think that makes a lot of sense.
Okay, and I mean, this could be maybe a further conversation. We do all ours on with RedCap, and I'm sure it's one of those things where if it's the same questions, James could pretty easily, like, you just have them fill out which market they're at. I don't think we do not get GusNIP level response rates, Mary. So we don't even do that at ours. So I don't think we necessarily need to like push for a certain level of response, but just if we could, again, if it's even only 30 responses from across the state, that's so much, that's more than none, and things like that. So I'm happy to share what we currently have. Any of that would be helpful.
Sure. We can, Naima and Megan and I and anybody else can talk about it for sure.
Okay.
Yeah, and so one other thing that we do plan to fund through SPAN is a very intentional evaluation process for our 2 pilot programs. I think at least your point is a good one, to layer in some of that qualitative data from the perspective of clients and customers would be really valuable, because that's not currently something that we have as in terms of data that we're collecting. I'm curious though, I'm just kind of assuming if it's all RedCap, would that require a person with a tablet standing there and handing that to the customer?
So what we did last summer is we actually made business cards with the QR code, and then we had a piece of paper with the QR code at the market, and we had we had it open for a certain amount of time. So I think there's could be creative ways to think about, and then we pay everyone, we provide incentives to thank them for their time. So there could be ways to think about it, or even printed copies, and I think again, if it's not for anything, ours is it's not the shortest survey ever, but we could pick 5 questions that would be most helpful and try to make it shorter, just to at least have the data so that whoever's doing the evaluation could go back and do with it what they wished.
Yeah, let's talk about it for sure.
Okay, great.
And keep going with your questions. Nobody else is speaking up.
Okay,
So
one
the
other
floor is
question.
yours.
Yeah, so two thoughts. I think something that I want to make sure I just understand. So if IDOH is not doing the programmatic elements, is it really like housing the funding and evaluation side, or kind of what's the difference between what IDOH sees it doing versus the programmatic oversight?
So I'm not, so what you're at, the question is, what is the difference between IDOH doing the programmatic work versus not doing the programmatic work?
Like, I guess to me, like I see what like Marion County Public Health Department, what we currently do is like heavily programmatic. And we do not think it belongs in the health department and are working, we don't want it here because we're too slow, we're not a good fit long term. And so I know then there's kind of been this, I know Michelle and I have voiced the concern of like, is the state the right place? Because we see like even on our 8 market level, it takes us 3 months to sign a contract. It's awful. We can't expand because it's so slow. And so it's great that the state is not going to be doing that programmatic level, but then I think I'm not quite clear on what will the state be doing? Is it kind of the facilitation and funding, or kind of what is their piece of the puzzle?
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think in our mind, on one hand, basically we'll be writing a check to implementing agencies. We'll be holding the money and making subawards to our implementation partners who will be doing the programmatic work. With the exception of, I think that what we can leverage as a state agency is access to data analytics, evaluation services, and that type of thing. And the reason that I think that's really important is that that helps us also tie that information into all of our other programming. So we get a more holistic picture and we can be a little bit more intentional and efficient about how we are approaching these different types of funding streams and nutrition incentive work. So in my mind, it's more about sort of high level puzzle piecing and making sure that we are leveraging funding in the most efficient way possible. I don't anticipate us ever having any positions that like do what you do, Elise, that sit in the Department of Health. My vision is that those positions would always sit within our implementing partners organizations, but that we can on the back end provide some of that data analyzation, and we have a great Office of Data Analytics. We have access to evaluation services, and I think the most important thing though is really keeping our finger on the pulse of this as a core element of our overall community nutrition strategies. Megan, do you have anything you want to add to that?
No, I don't think so. I think that those are the strengths that we have as the state agency, as well as funding sources such as SPAN that nobody else could apply for other than this division. Literally was only designed for divisions like ours, one per state. And so it's sitting at the state, as we've seen, especially as COVID dollars have come down, where there's been caveats on every other funding source that says like for a state agency only, allows us to access other funding sources that wouldn't be accessible for programmatic work like this otherwise, which I think is also a huge benefit. But yeah, to Naima's point, then largely writing checks out to those like spokes in the regional settings to be able to do it. I mean, I think we've seen a lot of success in pairing with Mary, and really, we could talk about that, as kind of like a mini example of what this might look like. And Mary's organization being 10 times more nimble than the bureaucratic systems of government, in getting this money out to community, but that still is a partnership, right? When there's a problem that arises or a big question that comes up, Mary can always email us and we can work through that together. But on the day-to-day, that's Mary's implementing it. Mary gives us updates. We're not like micromanaging or overseeing what Mary does every day when it comes to, providing technical assistance or who did Mary have meetings with? Like those aren't the questions that we concern ourselves with day to day.
You're welcome to if you want to.
Yeah, if we have the capacity, maybe.
Feel free.
But it's just, by utilizing Mary and her expertise and the expertise of the St. Joe Community Health Foundation, having that GusNIP grant, we've really been able to accelerate how fast money has been able to get out the door to communities.
So just one thing to add to that, Megan, I think that the other advantage of having it sit in our division specifically in the state is that we are not afraid to go after funding. So we can and will go after complementary funding streams to supplement and bolster these programs. And again, like to Megan's initial point, this is where we're starting. Because we want to start and we want to move forward. But this might not be where we are in 2 years. You know, we might get 18 months into span and say, oh my gosh, Elise and Michelle knew it all along and they told us, but we didn't listen. And we've really got to find a 501c3 partner to absorb Double Up. And if that happens, then we are more than happy to pivot in that direction. I think that right now, what we want to just make sure that we're doing is really taking advantage of this moment in time and not letting all of these different funding streams pass us by. If I can just kind of ask again, I know Elise articulated maybe a need for some Double Up convenings. What's the temperature of the group in terms of just putting that monthly ININ meeting back on the calendar just as a space to talk through things? If there's not a ton of desire to do that without more firm direction, that will come later when we hire that position, totally understood. We just wanted to make sure we were asking and not sort of assuming that people didn't want to have a meeting. So I'll pause again and see if there are any thoughts on that.
I'll be honest, mine would be more by pillar. Like for me, I mean, and maybe it would rotate that way, but like I don't need to or want to be on a Produce RX one. And that's a huge behemoth of its own. And so I would find it much more beneficial if it could be focused, because then you can really get into like, let's get into the nuts and bolts of what's going well and what's not. And like, I would rather dig deep as opposed to kind of an overview of these really, I mean, each of them are, you could easily have your own meeting on each of them. And I think that, I know that's more meetings for those facilitating, but I think I would find that personally more beneficial.
Anyone else? It's a quiet group today.
Looks like Christina agrees with Elise in the chat. Thank you for that, Christina. If people don't want to unmute, please feel free to use the chat. We will take notes from it and we should be able to download it after this is over. Go ahead, Angela.
Thanks. Yeah, I think I would agree with Elise that if each meeting is like over a different topic, like what's going on with senior farmers market nutrition program or something, or WIC or Produce RX or whatever, that can be helpful for us to have a choice in that time. Yeah, and I think I'm confused about something, so I want to ask a clarifying question. So there's the SNAP matching program, which is basically for fruits and vegetables that we do have funding for right now, that St. Joe is reviewing those applications. And is that the plan going forward? Is that St. Joseph is going to keep playing that role? Or I guess, yeah, or
Yeah.
when does the state I guess I need another visual.
Yeah. No, that's fine. That's a great point of clarification, Angela. Okay, so for those who don't or aren't as aware with like the details of this, the state was awarded CDC funding. Every state department of health across the country was awarded CDC funding that came through one of the COVID relief packages back in 2021. Yes, great clarification, Naima. And our division received some of that funding. We have these programs and others. One of those programs is the SNAP Matching at Farmers Market program that is ongoing currently. That program took about a year to get off the ground due to having some back and forth conversation with the CDC and them extending the project period. And it is that source of funding that Mary currently operates for the state because Mary and the St. Joe Community Health Foundation holds a GusNIP grant. They are a GusNIP grantee for their area. And through that grant, hold the Double Up Indiana like contract with the greater Fair Food Network that controls that program, which is why it felt like a good place to put this program beyond their nimbleness as an organization. They have access to add farmers markets to that program to use that branding and provide some of that technical assistance capacity in ways that like Naima and I don't understand all the ins and outs of everything, but Mary does because Mary uses it every day in their GusNIP grant. And so that's like a very high level, I guess, overview of how that came to be the situation. And so that funding source ends May 30th of 2024, or until all of the funding is allocated out into community. So, I mean, that is when the project period ends. So our farmers markets can use that funding until that point, and they'll have reporting responsibilities until that point. But should the funding run out in like 5 months, then there's no more funding for Mary to give out in that period, but she would still be in charge of, tracking all of those grantees until that period and working with us to provide us that data so we can roll it up into our reports that get rolled up and rolled up and rolled up all the way to the CDC. After that funding source is gone after May 30th of 2024, that's where the mention of a statewide GusNIP grant came into play. That GusNIP application traditionally, opens in the spring. So it would kind of be good timing that this program would be ending and we would have a lot of data to show the efficacy of this program. And we could apply for a larger GusNIP grant for continued funding supporting this type of work, not only in farmers markets, but hopefully in retail. Similar to the way that Elise supports retail here in Indianapolis through Safeways. That pot of funding would be something that I guess in theory is managed by the state. How that works in actuality is something that the person hired into the nutrition incentive coordinator position and builds out this organization and brings together a group of people to apply for this, and all of those things would get worked out as time goes on. But those are different funding sources. With the one that Mary's managing, we're operating through May 30th of 2024. Does that answer your question about how it operates now and will operate in the future?
Yes, thank you so much. I
Yeah,
really
you're
wanted you to walk through that again.
Yeah,
so
you're good.
So then, in theory, this network could be involved in like the criteria for future grant funds, or like, kind of, I'm curious about the review process and like, how is that currently informed? Is that like national guidelines being used, or is it something that we need to come up with in the future? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And it's a good question. I think that would come into play more if we wanted to explore some kind of more nimble food fund where we would award funding to like a wide variety of food related projects. For the way we have SNAP matching structured now and for Double Up, it's mainly just that you have to be a farmer's market that accepts SNAP. That's really the only eligibility criteria. So we had that conversation about SNAP to fruit and veg versus SNAP to SNAP. And we decided to stick with SNAP to fruit and veg. double up and if GusNIP through a GusNIP grant, we wouldn't even have an option to consider, to consider any other alternative. They only fund SNAP to fruit and vegetable incentive programs. So again, Angela, I think to explore what a different model might look like is where we're hoping how we would utilize that third pillar to really think creatively about how to fund incentive programming maybe outside of that more traditional fruit and veg model.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate that.
I am curious in the timing or like what the kind of thought of building out the regional hubs for the specifically double up. Would that be something like that would happen in that first year of SPAN, or kind of what would happen for the places that don't have them?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think that, yes, that would be one of the main activities that we would be working on in our first year of SPAN, and one of the main charges of this new position. And I think that, you know, in some regions of the state, the implementation partners, wink, wink, Mary, might be kind of obvious, who, well, hopefully, maybe not. But in others, it might be challenging. So we might, you know, in theory, we might hope for 3, 4, or 5, and maybe there's actually only 2 that we can identify. I think it's one of those things, again, that we have to really be flexible with ourselves about and realize that we're going to start, and where we are is where we are, and we will continue to build the program as we go. So if at the end of the first year of SPAN, if we only have 2 implementation partners that have signed on, that's where we are, and that's what we will build our GusNIP application around, and then we'll go from there. You know, I don't think with everything that we do, we try to be minimally prescriptive, right? Like, we understand that community work, especially in the food space, is complicated and ever changing. So we're trying not to be too rigid about our expectations of the first year. Other than that, we want to work with you all hand in hand to develop this program together, and get to the best place possible in advance of the application for that GusNIP.
Like, Elise, I know I'm frozen. Am I frozen for anyone else? Oh, okay. I just frozen in this really interesting face on my own screen. I know, for example, like in your REACH application, there are, you know, goals of moving your guys' program out of the health department to a 501c3 in the central area, which would make sense as a, you know, a central region implementation partner, and potentially, you know, if there is a region that doesn't have the capacity or doesn't have a community-based organization that might be really strong to take on this initially, maybe they incubate that for a while, right? They serve that region too. And as one emerges, you know, they can maybe hand off some of those counties in that region as it makes sense. So yeah, like I know as we wrote SPAN and our goal of the regional hub and spoke situation, we did also understand, and we're in communication with Michelle and Sandy about what your guys' goals were for your very high functioning and well-oiled machine here in central Indiana. Well, I guess Marion County, and what we hope will be central Indiana as it continues to be able to grow outside of the, you know, confines of a Department of Health that is only one county of service area. And so I think opportunities like that, you know, they might not arise in 6 months in other regions, but there is momentum in other regions, and I think that we'll see some organizations begin to take the lead and or start to build some capacity in this way for their whatever region that they do serve, even if it is, you know, 11 counties. We have 92 of them. It's a lot of counties to divide up even 4 or 5 ways for some organizations, right? So trying to, Naeema's point, be nimble, but we do understand there is some momentum here, not only through your guys' REACH application, but also in other areas of the state, just the way that some people are operating and types of funding sources that they're going for.
Thanks for clarifying that, Mary. Sorry to put you on the spot. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I mean, we're really happy to see this move forward. We really believe in nutrition incentives in general, and I think that's why our board is really happy to do this and make this commitment. But our primary core mission is really funding nonprofits in our area. So that's what we do primarily.
Got it. I also want to, we use the term hub and spoke model here because I think it's easy to visualize it that way, but I think that the model that we're describing is not a true hub and spoke model because we are not really acting as the hub, right? Like in a hub and spoke model, a centralized organization programmatically controls everything and disperses funding to the spoke organizations. That's not really what we're proposing here. I don't know if there's a model that exists that reflects what we're proposing, but if not, we'll write a paper on it and become famous.
There we go. Spoke. No. I will just say I was able to go to the EFMMP event last week, and I think it just kind of reaffirmed the need for this of just there was, farmers markets, the two in Morgan County who they had a SNAP machine that they've never taken out of the box because they're confused and they don't, they're like, I don't know how this works. And, I was able to talk with them, and I think it's a little late for us to get fully be their technical assistance partner for this summer, but we're still in contact, and I had a phone call with them already today. And I just think like, again, these it's a little overwhelming when you're on your own, but it made me more invigorated for this Central Indiana organization because it's like, we know they're there and they feel a little lost and don't know how to get going. So I think, there's exciting things ahead.
Okay, guys, we have 5 minutes left if anyone has any other questions or comments. If you did not see it, and it will be in the notes, Elise did post that she is leaving her position. She's on to an incredibly exciting endeavor. So we wish you all the best, Elise, but they are hoping to hire her replacement so that she can still be here when they start, which is a great way to train people up. So if you know of someone, if you are that person who's interested in that position, she dropped the link to that job posting. You can find it if you look for jobs at the Marion County Public Health Department. If you're not aware of how things work here in Indianapolis, that is technically the Health and Hospital Corporation of Marion County, or Health and Hospital Corporation. So you'll see jobs for like Eskenazi and all sorts of places that belong under that big corporation, but you should be able to find that position. And that link will be in our meeting notes. I will clean them up because they're incredibly ugly right now, and send this recording and our notes out to everyone. But that is our current available open position. 2 more positions coming in the near future, semi-near future, to the Department of Health team. But yeah, Elise, her position is open.
I should mention as well that if we get spanned, there will also be other positions coming for our division. So that's exciting. So we'll keep you all posted. If we get spanned, we will be hoping to add an RD to our team to oversee our other non-nutrition incentive related nutrition work, mainly related to food service guidelines and technical assistance around that. But yeah, more to come on that. So I also just want to make sure we're recapping that we're going to explore some kind of convening by pillar between now and October. And Megan and I will kind of chat about that, and we'll be in touch.
Sounds great. We thank you all for your time today. And if you have any thoughts or questions that come up, and or you didn't feel comfortable expressing them in the public chat or coming off of mute, please feel free to send myself and or Naima an email, and we can have that conversation and or write down your thoughts and make sure that they're saved in the comments for this meeting. We will see you all again soon. I promise we'll send you all some calendar updates and everything else. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.